This is Jordan Poyer, safety for the Buffalo Bills, and you are now listening to Cover One Buffalo Podcast. Let's go.
Good evening and welcome to the Cover One Buffalo Podcast. Thank you for joining us tonight. You are here with your regular host, Greg Tompsett, along with a special guest, Sal Capaccio of WGR. Sal, how are we doing?
Good. Thanks for having me on, man. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate your patience. This is our second try for anybody who wasn't on with us last week. We were able to work through a couple of things here, but glad to have you on. For anyone who hasn't had a chance, jump on over to cover1.net. Have a lot of good things going on. Eric's video breakdowns, all the coverage from Rob Quinn and Fernando. You have people like Aaron and I rambling about what's going on with the team, but a lot of great things, especially in the premium Slack channel. Just a good community of people being able to come in. Many of those guys in the chat with us here tonight. A lot of good questions of things going on. Sal, what kind of stuff you got going on? I know we talked last time about a really insightful piece with Derek Anderson, kind of talking through the relationship with Josh Allen and maybe even a little mindset of what Mitch Morse has been going through lately. We'll get into that a little bit more, but what are the people going to see from you coming up next?
Well, really, a lot of it's just focused on what's coming up this week. Roster moves, obviously, a lot of that's going on. And then taking a look at the Jets, I have some stuff today on my Twitter feed about a conversation with Frank Gore and, what happened with Lesean McCoy. How they found out, very interesting how he found out, I should say. He was actually working out with Lesean and found out right afterwards. Lesean told him, and he said he thought he was BSing him. And then he realized it was true. And he was, obviously he said it was tough. It was tough to take, but, he understands this business and the way things happen. And then we talked a little bit about Devin Singletary and what he thinks about him. He said he's going to be fine. He said he's a young guy who can do everything, works hard, great kid. And Frank talked a lot about just kind of the room being tight and them all knowing their role and doing whatever it takes for the team to win. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, no, it's really funny to hear that he thought he was BSing him. It wasn't even serious here. It shows you how out of left field this was taken. And I got back and forth with a few conversations from people that, was like, oh, well, everybody saw this coming. And I said, that's not fair. I said, many people speculated multiple times over the last 2 years that this was possible at any point here. I don't think I heard anyone talking about this in the last week or so here. I didn't see any 53-man projections with him being cut. I didn't see anything along those lines. So someone as plugged into the team as you are, how did you take that? Was that as surprising as it was to the fans like us?
Well, I'll tell you, let's go back to last trade deadline. I thought there was a chance they could move him, and then they didn't. And from everything I was told, from everything I heard, he was going to be on this team come training camp. And I will tell you that as soon as the season ended, most people said, oh, yeah, he's not going to last till training camp. They'll move him. They'll cut him. They'll trade him. And I kept saying, no, he's going to be here at training camp. He's going to be here at training camp. And then they drafted Devin Singletary in the third round. And even I said, okay, well, maybe they do have something in place here, but I would still go by what I was hearing and trusting the people that I had talked to, which is he's going to be on this roster come training camp. And I will tell you that through May and June and up until the first day of training camp, there was tons of speculation, local and national. People just they really assumed that Lesean was going to be gone. And I kept holding true saying, no, I think he's going to be here day one, but anything can happen after that. And even when they got to training camp, I figured, okay, I guess it's possible. But as training camp started to go on, you just didn't get that sense. You didn't get that sense that they were really, eager to move him and it looked like he was going to be safe on the roster, like you said. But I think what happened here was Lesean was really an expensive insurance policy, Greg, the way it comes down to it, which is they really liked Devin Singletary when they drafted him. They probably had a plan that he could eventually be the number one guy or at least share the load. But they wanted to make sure that if he wasn't the guy, that at least they still had Lesean there because they didn't have to move on from him for any financial reasons or anything like that. And I think what happened was Devin Singletary showed that he can be that guy, and they eventually and ultimately made the decision, okay, we kept him around long enough that we could make sure, and now it's time that we can move on, and that's what they did.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting. I think that, some fans get a little carried away, especially, people get excited playing Madden and they go, well, I made this trade for this and I was able to do that. And you see them get compensation for a Russell Bodine. You see them get compensation for a Wyatt Teller, even a surprising amount of compensation for Teller. And then it really does spell out that getting compensation for a $9 million running back that a team would have to take on $6 million plus at 31 years old, besides the fact of not wanting to shoehorn him into a role that maybe doesn't play well with other veterans that you're negotiating with or other agents. I thought it was interesting. As some fans, I think, maybe assumed that if he was going to be moved, it would have been a trade. Is that maybe not even specific to Shady? Is that something that fans maybe read into too much? Is there really some of that stuff where Bean and the front office want to make good with players, want to take care of their own guys, want to make good with agents? Or is it if he got the right price, he probably would have traded him and he just didn't get the right price?
Well, I don't think they were shopping him, first of all. In fact, Brandon Bean told us on the conference call, on Sunday that on Saturday late, he said that, there was nothing, nobody called him. There was nothing going on all summer up until the very last few hours or day or so, I guess, when they decided to move on from him. They made some calls and nobody was really interested. And you have to think who's really going to be for a 31-year-old that's going to cost over $6 million cash, and you have to take that contract along with it. Look, I think that to your original part of the question there, it speaks more to the positional value. It doesn't really speak to Lesean McCoy. Lesean McCoy is a very good football player. I mean, look what's going on with Dallas with Ezekiel Elliott. As great as he is, Ezekiel Elliott, it's about positional value. The replacement value you can get for a much younger, cheaper guy is not really that much different, and you're paying so much more. It's not like quarterback where you really have the difference between the haves and the have-nots and what they could do for your football team. And then as far as, taking care of guys and things like that, I just think this regime, they want to always at least do right by the player as best they can, but they have to make decisions based on what's best for the football team. So I know some people said, this was wrong. They should have let Lesean McCoy go somewhere else earlier. They should have let him pick his team. They should have tried to trade him. And that's all well and good. But at the end of the day, Brandon Bean's obligations to the Buffalo Bills, not to Lesean McCoy. As much as they want to try and help these guys and do what's best by them when they can, and I do believe that's the case, they ultimately have to do what's best for the Buffalo Bills. If that means that something is handled in a different sort of way, then that's what happens.
Absolutely. And I think your comment on the insurance policy for Singletary is really sharp, that, maybe they thought highly of him. I know Bean made the comment about the most fun film that he saw of any player, but no one's sure until you see him against NFL caliber competition. So being able to hedge that with a guy of Shady's caliber is a nice luxury that most teams don't have. Moving into some of the other guys, maybe some of the other names that, again, fans kind of clung on to that got a lot of attention. We saw that obviously Christian Wade, Duke Williams, David Sills didn't catch on with the Bills' 53-man roster. Two of them came back with through the practice squad, and Sills caught on with the Giants practice squad. Any surprises there? I know that those were probably built up a little bit more in fan circles than what was realistic, I think, from the roster standpoint.
I was never a guy who felt that David Sills was going to make the roster. Some people just loved him. I think it was really overblown about how he was treated in that Bills Embedded series. And everybody saw that, they said, "Oh my God, they absolutely love this guy." And I kept reminding people, look, that's a made-for-TV, so to speak, thing. They're going to latch on to one guy and show you the process of it. I'm guessing, I don't know this, that they really felt that way about a lot of guys that they went out and got as undrafted free agents. But they wound up showing you David Sills.
Well, I made the point earlier. I would guess that 90% of that was the same with Ryan Bates, and then Bates picked Philadelphia.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And they probably wanted Ryan Bates, and maybe they were interested in bringing him in. But I really like what Duke Williams did, obviously, in preseason. Yeah. I think that it was a very tough call. Listening to Sean McDermott, it seemed like it was a tough call, and I understand why people are upset by that. And, that's the case. You have every right to. I think that's what we do, right? People have their opinions about how the roster should be constructed. And I guess they figured that, and I was a little bit surprised that they actually put Duke Williams on the practice squad. I didn't think he was practice squad type of material. Then, when it happened, I wasn't surprised, but I kept saying all preseason, I didn't think he'd be a practice squad guy because he had already been a pro for a couple of years in the CFL. And if he's not good enough to make your roster, why do you want to develop him? But I think he showed enough. I think he showed enough in the last couple of weeks that they said, hey, if we do have an injury, we got a guy here who knows our system. He's worked his butt off and he can help us. So the thing about you have to remember from Brandon Bean and the Buffalo Bills is they treat their practice squad truly as a developmental squad, like a minor league. They do not treat their practice squad just as practice bodies for the scout team, so to speak. Some teams are like that. Some teams just say, we need guys, we need bodies, who's going to help us give a look. the Bills want to promote from within. If there's an injury, they'd rather bring a guy up than go out and get somebody else. Now, sometimes necessity, they have to do that, but that's how they treat their practice squad. So it wasn't a surprise to me that they brought in the guys that they brought in. I'm looking right now, Nate Becker, Cam Lewis, Eric Magnuson, Duke, Eddie Yarbrough. You know, I'm glad Eddie's back. He's such a good guy, and I'm glad that he has eligibility to be on the practice squad for them to bring him. Kyle Pecco, what a story that is with his wife battling cancer, that they were able to bring him back, and he's going to collect a paycheck every week, and that's really nice right there. And you know, again, I don't know if that had anything to do with it, but it wouldn't surprise me if they said, you know what, we have no problem having this guy on the team, and obviously with his wife, what she's going through, that'd be a great thing to do. And then they brought and got some guys from other places. Nate Hall from Dallas, Tyron Johnson, who was with the Houston Texans, wide receiver. The one that's interesting is Davis Webb. And I think that people, you know, they kept asking about Tyree. I didn't think Tyree was going to make the practice squad, and he didn't. And here's why I think. He's just not far enough along for what they need. They need someone every day to come in, give them a good look for their scout team. And if, going back to what I just said, if someone does get hurt, Josh or Brett Barkley, they want somebody who's ready to play in the NFL if they have to. That's nothing against Tyree Jackson's future. He may have a future at a different spot. He may have a future in Buffalo eventually down the road if circumstances are different. But they wanted a guy, at least I think, who they felt a little more comfortable, who was a little bit more ahead of where Tyree Jackson was, because he was definitely not ready to play in this league.
Yeah, and I think the upside was there. People saw some of the flashes here and there, but the biggest area that I found it was coming down to that battle for the sixth receiver, and that you're trying to get some good film to watch Isaiah McKenzie, Ray McLeod, Duke Williams, even Nick Easley and Cam Phillips. And honestly, it made it difficult some of the times to even evaluate those receivers, because there were times that Tyree was so far off or just didn't make the right read or pulled it down and ran that I just went through my mind like that. I don't know if that exactly comes into play with what the coaches are looking at, but is that what it's going to be like on the scout team? Is that what it's going to be like in practice where they're trying to run things? And it's just, made it very apparent.
Well, let me also throw this out there. Someone asked a great question just now in the chat box there, which is, well, given what I just said, is really Davis Webb that type of guy? Because, he hasn't really done much. But here's the difference. No, but Davis Webb has been a pro for 3 years in this league. And the guys that are out there on the street, there's not going to be much difference between a lot of them. There's not that good. If you're looking for somebody who's going to come in here who has a bunch of experience and won games, you're not going to get it. I mean, that's why they're out on the street. That's why they don't have a job. Who are you talking about? You talking about Brett Rippon? You're talking about Kyle Sloter? I mean, these are the kinds of guys that are out on practice squads right now, the Tyree Jacksons of the world, right? So you bring in a guy who does have pro experience, but here's it. And I don't discount the whole Jets thing, right? I mean, obviously he can help them prepare for the Jets, and there's no doubt about it. But I think more than anything, it's not the intel he's going to give the Bills on the Jets. It's the fact that he can run the scout team this week better than anybody else that they could bring over there, because he's going to understand the concepts. It's not necessarily giving the secrets, it's giving a look, right? And on top of that, if they decide to keep him beyond 2, 3, 4 weeks and they don't move on from him, I'm guessing it's because, look, I mean, he does have 3 years experience in the league, and you're not going to get really that much from other guys who are out there.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. I think he's closer to functional in that, break glass in case of emergency kind of mode than what Tyree was. And that if it works out for Tyree, God bless him. I hope that he gets himself a shot. I know that, fair or not, some people have speculated about, is quarterback his long-term position? Does his size and athleticism translate somewhere similar to Logan Thomas, who was here for a long time? And I think that he deserves to give himself a fair shot to develop, and you saw some of that upside. But I think you were spot on that he just wasn't close enough to be able to make that functional on a day-to-day basis.
Apparent to me, and it was apparent to me. Sorry to cut you off. And the thing is, Davis Webb, by the way, when I say 3 years, he's been in the league 2 years, plus 1 preseason, obviously. So this is his 3rd season. But it was apparent to me about Tyree, everything I just said. In the last preseason game, Greg, he took 58 snaps. Every single one of them was out of shotgun.
Yes.
Because he is not quick enough to do things from under center. And if that's the case, you can't have him on your practice squad if you're truly a guy that you think might be able to and have to come up and play for you. He was in shotgun because that's what he's comfortable with, and they didn't feel comfortable with him putting him under center in the way things he's processing. He just does everything too slow right now, and the game moves a little too fast, and that was an indication for me for sure.
Yeah, and again, not anything against him. Wish him all the best, but just wasn't quite there yet. So, another little surprise there. There was some interesting moves, and initially 5 tight ends. I thought that many people saw it as 3, with assuming Tyler Kroft was going to be on the pup. So maybe a silver lining, some good news there. And then a little bit of a quick move where Kroom initially made the roster and then was put on IR and brought back Kurt Coleman. I had kind of speculated that was almost like a paired movement, that Kroom is almost like Kroft insurance, that if Kroft doesn't hold up the way they're hoping, all of a sudden you have a guy who could come back week 9-ish, but that I thought it was at least promising that Kroft was there. So what were your thoughts on the tight end position? Anything you've seen with Kroft's progress or movement, and what you thought on the initial list of 5 tight ends?
I was surprised they kept 5 tight ends, especially considering they kept 10 offensive linemen. I mean, you think about that, that's 15 guys that play across the line, right? I mean, it's kind of interesting that they kept all of those guys. But when you think about it, obviously it's only 4 that are going to be active. There's no way, I don't think Tyler Kroft's going to be active on game day, at least week 1, week 2. Maybe after that, we'll see where it goes. I think it's a really good point you made about Jason Kroom. He's kind of, he's the pass catching tight end until Dawson Knox develops into that guy, because you don't know, because he did have an injury. You do like the athleticism. He hasn't developed into that guy yet. You want to see him do it, kind of like we talked about with Devin Singletary. We got to see before we can really make that decision. So the reason why he goes on IR now, in case people don't know, is if he goes on IR before the final rosters are set, he's out for the year for sure.
Yep.
If you put him on IR after he makes the final roster, then he is eligible to return. So yeah, let's watch and see how Tyler Kroft goes. If that is going good, then you could just keep Jason Kroom on the IR. He comes back next year and he fights for a roster spot. If Tyler Kroft doesn't stay healthy, if things aren't progressing the way you want, you have a guy that can come in. And also, if there is an injury down the line to another tight end, because let's be honest, Lee Smith is only going to be a blocker.
Yep.
And Tommy Sweeney isn't the greatest athlete, prospectively, obviously, considering what they're dealing with at tight end, right? Relative, better athlete than me, I'm sure he is, right? So, at least I hope so. He's a lot younger and he's playing in the NFL. But I think that's why they did it. But we'll see, and we'll see how it goes. I wouldn't be surprised at the end of the year if everybody stays healthy. At the end of the year, I mean, you're probably talking about Smith, Kroft, and Knox dressing for games, and maybe Sweeney being the guy left out. But I think, again, a lot of it depends on – I'm not sure about Kroft's health, right? We got to see. This is a guy that's been hurt before. He had this injury that we did day 1 of the OTA, so I think they're creating some insurance.
Yeah, and I think it makes a lot of sense. And obviously, this kind of speaks to an overall kind of statement on the roster that those kind of decisions, the fact that people like Captain Munnerlyn and Jason Kroom now being IR'd, and Sonoris Perry and Lesean McCoy, obviously at the highest level, that those kind of players are released not for financial reasons, not for locker room reasons, but because, hey, we have guys who are good enough that we think fit what we want to do. And that for the first time in a long time, the Bills had the 3rd most players claimed from any other team. They had 3. They put in no claims and claimed no players. They were happy with their 53. When's the last time we could say that about this roster?
That's right. And I feel a little vindicated because I kept saying I think the roster's good enough where you're going to see some guys cut that go to other teams. And that's obviously what happened here with the Bills. So that's a good sign. I think they're on the right track for what they want to do with the roster. And here's the other thing. You think about it, Greg, like when Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane took over in 2017, we're just talking 2.5 years ago now, really, right? When they took over at that time, the only guys who are still on this roster now from that group are Lorenzo Alexander, Shaq Lawson, and Jerry Hughes. Reed Ferguson was on the practice squad as well. That's it. I mean, 3 guys in 2 years. They have completely flipped the roster. They've completely turned it over, and they have players now that are getting picked up by other teams. So I think that's a sign of progress, obviously. I think the top end of the roster still needs some more talent, but the bottom of the roster has pushed up. So you're seeing this now. I think this part of it still needs to go up a little bit. We'll see where Josh Allen obviously develops, but they don't have, even getting rid of Lesean McCoy, obviously, I think hurts that because they don't have that superstar name, but you still need, I think, a little bit more high-end talent on offense, but it's still better than it was last year, but certainly the bottom of the roster is pushing up closer.
Yeah, I think that some of the sustainability and the teams that you see really in the playoff hunt every single year have those elite talents at the playmaking positions, at the quarterback position, at the left tackle position, whatever it might be. So I think there's still room to be needed. And I think there's some players that have the potential to get to that elite level, but not automatically. And many of them on defense that, I think so. The offensive points are very well made. Sliding over to defense, so I think a little less ambiguity and a little less question going into it. Some of the back end pieces there, I thought the defensive line was pretty clean. Once Mike Love went to IR, that was pretty solid there. Eddie Yarborough, I don't think had a legit chance. The defensive tackles were always rock solid. Linebacker, there's a little question. Would Deion Lacey, would Voshon Joseph push a Maurice Alexander or a Julian Stanford? So once Voshon went on IR and then Lacey didn't make it, that cleaned out. But the secondary was where a lot of the questions were. I know I was certainly surprised that neither Lafayette Pitts nor Captain Munderland made it, and that Dean Marlowe did. So any questions on the front seven that surprised you? And then what was your take on the secondary when we saw that list come out?
Let me give you a little insight on something here, how my job works a little bit. I have to go around the locker room and I have to get guys to say their name, position, and school for radio lineups. For example, we say, John Murphy says, let's listen, and here's who's starting on offense. And you hear Josh Allen, quarterback, Wyoming, Cole Beasley, wide receiver, SMU. And it's funny, and today I started doing that to make sure I get all the guys. And I already have all the guys from last year, right? So we don't have to do that. They're in the system. So I'm going down the list. I didn't have to talk to a lot of defenders because everybody's returning. It's so funny. I only had to really go get offensive players. So I'm going around the locker room. I'm like, wait a minute, I already have got that guy. Because there's so many returning guys on offense or defense. It's so funny. And the offense has changed so much that I'm getting Frank Gore and I'm getting TJ Yeldon. I'm getting Devin Singletary. I'm getting all the offensive linemen to kind of do it. But on defense, it's like, oh, there's that Oliver. I got to get him. I mean, everybody else, what are you talking about? But there are obviously a few names. I think let me start with defensive line. You're right. I think that was just rock solid from the beginning. Really only one change there. Kyle Williams retires. Ed Oliver comes in. We know who the four were pretty much going to be all offseason long. We only had one question at defensive end. Was it going to be Mike Love or Daryl Johnson? And maybe both. Once Daryl Johnson came out, there was no way they were going to cut him with the flash that he showed and being a draft pick this year. Mike Love goes to IR. Like you said, I think that we all knew Eddie would probably be left out. I'm glad he's back in the practice squad. I do think there was a good battle at backup linebacker that nobody was really talking about a lot during preseason. These guys were kind of changing in and out. I really never knew who was going to be there. Deion Lacey and Maurice Alexander, I think, were right there. Yep. And then because you have that weird kind of thing of how they're treating Saran Neal and where he's playing and he's in the box, he's not. So we'll get to him in a second because he's a secondary guy. But Voshon Joseph, his injury in the last preseason game kind of settled everything. Yeah. The only issue I think from there is it Deion Lacey or Maurice Alexander? And they really like Maurice Alexander's versatility. So he winds up keeping that job. And I think he's going to be active pretty much on game days because he is a core special teamer. So you're talking Julian Stanford, Corey Thompson, Maurice Alexander. That's pretty much your three backup linebackers for the team. Then you go to the secondary. Not totally surprised they kept Dean Marlowe. I was surprised early on when Dean Marlowe was really playing so much, and it was apparent to me that he was going to be a big factor in what they were doing. But I thought all along Dean Marlowe would be kept. Now, I don't know if that means he's going to be kept the whole year, right? Anything could happen. They do have extra defensive backs. We'll see what happens. Jaquan Johnson, no way they were going to get rid of him. Young guy coming in. It was their draft pick this year. And again, I think Saran Neal, because of his versatility and the role he can play, he's really a big nickel corner, but he's listed as a safety on the roster, but he's really not. He's a big nickel corner. He's going to play in the box. And then obviously you have Kevin Johnson as the other backup there. So it's an interesting exercise if you want to do it. Maybe this is something all your listeners or viewers can do. I was going around and asking a few of the media members today. I said, let's try and predict who the 7 inactive guys are on Sunday. All right. Cause there's going to be 7 inactive guys. And what we came up with was 3 offensive linemen. I think this is who I would choose. I think Butker, Connor McDermott, and Ryan Bates, probably those 3. Tyler Croft is going to be inactive as a tight end. Yep. I think that Isaiah McKenzie would be inactive, probably dress 6 wide receivers. Isaiah would be the other one. And then probably 2 safeties. Dean Marlowe, Jaquan Johnson, because do you really need all those safeties considering what Saran Neal can do for you? I think it's an interesting exercise to go through and try and figure it out. But that's my my pick. So just remember that and go back. If that's right, if those are the 7 guys that are inactive, I think that's what it would be.
Yeah, well, and it's really interesting because the first 5 or 6 I think are pretty strong, but when you get to that last one, is it, can Jaquan play more on special teams than what if I know they were messing around with it the one day that I was at camp, they were running kind of a 46-man drill, and Harrison Phillips wasn't over there and wasn't rotating in, and I was curious, like almost every team runs 4 defensive tackles active every game day, but when you have a guy like Shaq Lawson who could kick into 3 technique, you have a guy like Lorenzo Alexander who can play some D-line as needed. If you play a team that is wide open passing all the time, it might not be crazy that you might see some creativity of going short at a spot that you don't normally do to give you versatility in the back end or on special teams. So, yeah, getting to that 7th guy who's inactive is going to be really interesting.
So, and I think that at this point, Jaquan Johnson, they'd probably rather have Maurice Alexander, make sure he's out there first game, special teams, how much that he's going to matter to them. But who knows? I mean, they could wind up doing something a little bit different, a little bit crazy. Like you said, the way Sean McDermott rotates his D lineman, I'd be pretty stunned if they did something like that. But I totally get where you're coming from, because they can start to do things like that because of the position versatility a lot of these guys have.
Yeah, and I would assume that 13, 14 games of the year he probably is, but it would just struck me as interesting that they were playing with that and moving pieces around that way. And then I know, you mentioned it when you get to the list of the guys who are potentially inactive on game day, that does put them at risk of if there is a move here. I know we didn't see anyone claimed directly off waivers. They did have a interesting list of names come in for workouts today. I know some fans clung on to, obviously Laquan Treadwell, Noah Spence. Those are some names that people have become familiar with in previous draft, workups and getting up to that point. Didn't work out where they were. I think there were 5 or 6 punters that were brought in. So I'll ask, 1, was there anyone that stood out? And 2, do you expect there to be an actual transaction between now and game 1?
I think the 2 names you brought up are very interesting, Laquan Treadwell and Noah Spence. I was a big fan of both of them in college coming out their respective years. Laquan Treadwell, for some reason, it's just never clicked. But he, to me, was, this guy, I love this guy. When he's coming out, I'm like, wow, this is be a great addition. But, that's why I'm not an NFL GM, I guess. But, the Bills will have good intel on him. Terrence Gray was with the Minnesota Vikings at the time when he was drafted. So I think that's a really good thing. That's a lot of these guys, they work in different front offices and stuff like that. So I'm sure the Bills will have good intel on him, and they can harken back to. And then obviously the other one is Noah Spence. Loved him. In fact, I know he had the issue coming out of college. There were a lot of question marks. He got kicked out when he originally gone to Ohio State and, had everything happen there. And when I went to the combine, and he was very upfront with how everything went down with him and, what happened. I was very impressed with his honesty and his openness about it, but it just seems like it hasn't worked in the NFL. And I don't know, a lot of maybe the backstory behind it, why it is, but it just doesn't know. And when I see stuff like that, Greg, I wonder if that's really a culture fit for what Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane want. So they're going to have to do a lot of digging on that if they really want to make that move. The punter situation, I just think Corey Bojorquez is on a super short leash. Really short. And that leash could end on Tuesday or Wednesday for all I know, right? We could be sitting here and we could be getting that move. So I wouldn't say I expect any moves to be made. I certainly would not be surprised if any moves were made, especially if they decide they want to do something at punter. Although Brandon Beane did tell us in his press conference on Sunday that, the holding part of it, being a holder, is something you have to consider because you don't want to change it up again immediately right before you get to the first game. And he didn't say that part, but he did talk about the holder a little bit. And I wonder if that would at least preserve, Corey Bojorquez for one more week if they even like somebody. Look, they apparently, it was reported that they tried to sign Britton Colquitt.
Yeah.
He was going to sign with the Bills, but then he went to Minnesota. So I think that tells you right there, they're clearly on the lookout for someone who can replace Corey Bojorquez if they can find someone, like that they feel can do the job. And like I said, I think he's on a short leash.
Yeah. I know that those couple moves there were interesting. I think one, the Weil that was in Minnesota that actually got waived because Colquitt got signed to Minnesota is an interesting name.
Right.
Obviously, a lot of fans are familiar with Ryan Allen, seeing him for many, many years against the Patriots and in the Super Bowl. Had a rough preseason and didn't have an awesome camp, and obviously beat out by a fifth rounder. It might be a reason that happened, but that's a name that's out there. I wasn't familiar with a lot of the guys that were brought into the camp today, and I know a fair amount of teams had 2 guys in camp, and a bunch of them got waived. So I'm curious to see where it is, but I think you're spot on in the idea that you don't simply want to bring in a change for the sake of change. You want it to actually be a material upgrade if you're going to do that, and you want there to be some surety in the holding and not throwing off Hauschka for those pieces of it that you're going to be there, because you're not going to have any assurance there, and that obviously Bajorquez, his challenge isn't the high-end capacity. Everybody sees it. When he gets a hold of one, he can launch the ball. It's the consistency and just the timing of not being able to do it in those clutch moments. And you could see it on his face. I was there in person for the Detroit game. I videoed one beforehand that he kicked 73 yards, and it was just a rocket. You get him out there on the first one of the game, and it's 32 yards. And you could just see the life go out of his face when he kicked it.
Yeah, I totally get that, and I agree. Look, remember that deal last year in the Tennessee game when Bajorquez stood up and there was he thought it was a fake field goal or something, and he got drilled. I mean, just things like that you just scratch your head at and say, everybody's got to be on the same page, and they're very specific about what they want. Sean McDermott runs a tight ship, and everything's very organized, and he wants specific things out of specific players and knowing your role and exactly how you're supposed to do it. And if you can't do that, then they're going to move on to somebody else. I do want to say, though, I think that, when people read, and I tweeted this today in case people don't know at Sal Sports, but when the teams work out guys, don't automatically assume that means that A, they're totally interested in signing that guy right now, or B, they're not happy with their current position group. The reason teams work players out is because they get a info on them and a database, and they check up on them essentially so that down the road, if something does happen to a guy at a position, they don't have to bring the guy in and work him out. They've already done that. They can move quickly. It saves time. It saves efficiency. So if you hear today that a quarterback worked out, it's not because they're not happy with Matt Barkley or even Davis Webb. It just means, hey, down the road, 6 weeks from now, if someone gets hurt, we had a guy here that we saw. Yep, let's check on him. Remember when we worked that guy out? That's how it works. Now, I'll say this, though. When you hear workouts week 1, a little different deal, because remember, vested veterans' salaries are guaranteed once they're on the roster week 1. So if they do find somebody who's a cheaper option, they may be more inclined to do it week 1 so that they aren't on the hook for the guaranteed salary, as opposed to having those guys work out after week 1 and just kind of put them off to the side and saying, okay, that's who we have in case of emergency.
Yeah, and I think they learned some of those lessons last year where you saw the short run from guys like Jeremy Curley and things like that where, hey, maybe we should have swapped in Isaiah McKenzie or someone like that a little bit sooner, or claimed someone like a McKenzie a little bit sooner than riding that out. But, no, it's really interesting. I appreciate your time tonight, Sal. A lot of great insight. Obviously, your access to the team is fantastic, so being able to see everything there. As we kind of get ready to wrap up here, why don't you share the fans a little bit about what your routine's going to be like as we get into the season, what they can expect from you each week as we're going game to game.
Well, finally, I am in a routine. I mean, it's always different, especially preseason. It's all over the place. You're playing on Thursday, you're playing on Friday. It's kind of weird. Now it's Sunday games, 1:00 pretty much all year except for Thanksgiving. So our routine is going to be the same. The Bills' routine is going to be the same. They practice Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. We hear from Sean McDermott, Josh Allen, and Tremaine Edmonds pretty much every week. Sean McDermott multiple times. I'll be down there covering practice every day on a daily basis. Tuesday's players' day off, so therefore it's this guy's day off. I try to get my golf in on Tuesday until the weather turns, all right? And then, obviously, home games, I'll be there at the stadium on the sidelines of the radio broadcast, but also away games, but we travel on Saturday as well and get to these cities. And I try to do a little something before the game to give some previews on our Facebook page at WGR 550. That's our Facebook. You can always find everything I write at WGR550.com. And I'm on the radio network broadcast, as well as obviously being the beat reporter. And you can hear that on the Buffalo Bills radio network, WGR, and elsewhere. We have a bunch of stations you can hear that. So, the other thing is, starting next Monday, the Extra Point Show returns. That's 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. on WGR. And the coolest thing about that show is I do not have any guests or do any interviews. All I do is take phone calls. And I let people vent. I let people react. I let people celebrate. I let people be miserable, whatever they want to do. I can be there. I can be their clown at the party if they want, or I can be their therapist. Whatever they want to be, just call, and that's what the show is about.
God bless you. No, and for any fan listening today, I assume most of you guys are already on board and listening to Sal. But if you don't, again, as he said, at Sal Sports on Twitter, fantastic follow on there, great insight. All the articles on WGR550.com. Make sure you check out everything that's going on. Make sure you're listening when you're local there, or on the WGR website. You're able to stream live from anywhere around the country. So I know as we've kind of built all the social media network around here, so many people are able to now stay connected to the team and to the community without living local anymore. So it's really expanded a lot of that, and it's great to see so many people stay connected to our beloved Buffalo Bills. All right.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Appreciate your time. Thank you guys for the chat. Really great insight tonight and good questions. Thank you again to Sal. Again, if you have a chance, give us a rating, give us a review. We do have a lot of fun doing this, but it's great when you can tell other folks about what we're doing. Tell a friend, tell everybody that's going on to come on board, check out what we have going on. Join as a Cover One Premium subscriber. We have a great community in the Premium Slack channel, great insight on the app, always updates coming out here, whether you listen to us on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, anywhere that you're listening. We like to be able to share the news and give us a rating and review. Let us know how we're doing. For everything else that's going on, we are finally back into the regular season. You'll see us doing our regular routine getting going here. We'll do a preview with some of the Jets beat reporters on Wednesday night. Then we'll do a post-game show on Sunday and get into that rhythm twice a week the rest of the season. But thank you again to Sal tonight. Thank you for everybody that's listening, and we are out.